welcome to another episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game. Let's meet the panel.
I'm Larry.
I'm Kaila.
I'm Charlie.
And I'm Josh. And today we are going to be revisiting a favorite poet of mine in Robert Frost. And the poem we're going over is Mending Wall. The discussion starter that I have for this one is...
Why is the wall broken? Why does it need mending? That's not it? No?
It's going to be
There's something that doesn't like a wall.
Back in a class that I took, American Literature Between the Wars, and Charlie was in that class with me.
How would they put up with me that long?
Dr. Tom's taught it.
Yes, I wonder what she's doing.
I wrote a paper in that class as an undergraduate arguing in favor of Robert Frost being a transcendentalist, and I used Mending Wall as one of my chief examples. Would you argue that this explanation can be a reasonable one? My argument about him being a transcendentalist.
Can you define transcendentalism?
Transcendentalism,
Get off the shelf, just kidding.
as in the idea of being a nonconformist, the idea of
Things go...
divinity within nature,
There you go.
individual thought.
It's kind of like laissez-faire. Let us do what, I don't want... Individualism, pretty much. That's what I get out of it. There's so many different ways you can define, in my book.
And that we're one with nature, that extent.
Basically, it's nature.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that he certainly seems to feel that way, right? Like, or more so than his neighbor.
Oh, yeah, most certainly. His neighbor's a conformist. And I think, to an extent, I feel that he reflects that, the emotions of a colonist.
I don't know about that. I think he's definitely a conservative. I think what we have is like I can't help but look at this as kind of not politically, but just psychologically, politically. Like what I'm trying to say is, when I think of walls, I think of conservatives, and when I think of not walls, I think of more liberal-minded people, more creative types, and where the conservatives are more conscientious and they like things in their categories. They like things to be...
So?
Yeah.
Hold on a
They
second.
like what's theirs is theirs. And
No,
they
not-
like that separation.
No,
they just like distinct...
I'm just turning it off.
They just like things to fit within categories. Like, not necessarily their own things, but just in general.
Mm-hmm.
They like there to be borders between things, borders between people, borders between concepts, and just...
I feel that he's just old school. He follows he conforms to what he was taught and his feelings have already been decided for him through his family ordeals.
I think a lot of parenting, especially back in this time period, and even before, going back even to the middle dark ages and whatnot, the parents made all of the choices. Even in the 1950s, and I'm going to 10 seconds. Even in the 1950s and 60s, that's when it started to break away a little bit, but if you had a daughter, you're going to college and you were going to get married at this and that. It was all set out. So
Mending Wall was written before the 1950s.
Well, yes, and I'm just using it as an example. But a lot of people have their lives put out for them.
I think it is interesting that the beginning of the poem, to me, it seems like nature has its own prerogative that frequently is going against what humans are trying to put upon it, despite the fact that nature, its intent is indifferent. So nature, it doesn't take any. It doesn't
want that wall there.
It's not that they don't want the wall there.
Nature doesn't want the wall there.
Nature doesn't care. Nature doesn't care if the wall's there or if it's not. It's just going to
do what
it
nature
does.
does.
Yeah.
Just to do. But the whole idea that the something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen ground shell under it, which it naturally does every year anyhow. The fact that they needed to reestablish their borders because the ground interfered with it before the neighbor decided to put up the stone, and spills the upper boulders in the sun and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. So nature's doing its own thing, and
but something tells me that nature, and of course this is just me, and as I completely agree with what you're saying, but I somehow have that urge to say that this nature is saying, that's why we're doing this every year. Basically, that's nature's way of saying, I don't want this stupid wool over me. Get it off my back.
No, I don't. No,
I mean, it's up there.
On one hand, let's
debating.
look at the narrator and the neighbor.
Of course, good idea.
The neighbor is looking to interfere with nature the way
Yes.
that a colonist would, and put up a stone wall so that nature has a less likely chance to interfere with
Right.
its intent.
And by caring for it and maintaining it, that preserves the wall itself.
The narrator, who is an inquisitive person,
Right.
he, on the other hand, decides that he's going to he feels that it's not necessarily worth interfering with nature. His goal is to keep the apple orchards and the pine trees separate.
Right,
But if
yes.
the two mingle with one another, so what?
Oh, there you go.
Did I get to you, Kaila?
I think that the narrator of the story is kind of saying, like, nature is as nature does, really, and but I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with the neighbor's point of view of, hey, let's put up a barrier between us. It's not, I don't think it's harmful in any way.
I think that if you're looking at it objectively, I feel that the neighbor does have a reasonable explanation. But the way that this poem is doing it, and because we're getting the narrator's point of view, and the narrator is what I would argue is a transcendental nonconformist, he's portraying the neighbor as being an old school fuddy-duddy. And
The pudding cannot touch the
by the
champagne.
second, the way that he paints him as bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand like an old stone savage armed, which to me gives that idea that he is a crotchety barbarian, and the fact that the reason that it is stone that he's using is capitalizing on his setting.
This is
setting
mine.
his ways.
Like, so in a way, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way. I don't mean this at all in a derogatory way. This is mine.
Mm-hmm.
No one else's. Like, I don't, I work with kids, and I've seen some stuff that I don't want to see. And when we play with Lego, I'll actually take it upon myself. We'll play with the Legos with the little kids. The high schoolers are like, "What the heck are you doing?" So, but even there's times, even there.
But yeah, as the poem progresses,
Yeah.
so does the narrator, and that creates, as Bruce Meyer, who wrote a critical essay on Mending Wall called "Critical Essay on Mending Wall," made mention to the fact that the separation of the two farms and the two worlds within the poem is further enhanced by the strange quality of separation within the communication process between the two characters. So, that as the wall is going up, the ideas between the narrator and the neighbor are becoming firmer and firmer.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, that could be. That could be. But the thing is, right? Like, the way that I look at it is, you need walls, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And also, you need to question walls at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think it's something that we need both sides of it in order to get in. Like we need something from the past, right? Like, I mean, he talks about his father, the neighbor's father,
Mm-hmm.
in his saying about walls make good neighbors or fences make good neighbors.
Yes.
So so you need to carry forth, your culture or whatever, and at the same time you need to question it and come up with new ways of doing things as well. and kind of trying to find balance between those two.
I agree with that. I need walls. My God, ma'am, why are you looking at me? I'm trying to take a shower. Okay, yeah, you need walls. But obviously, that's a really bad, but still, yeah.
Ready? Was there anything else somebody wanted to say? Final thoughts?
I think you guys pretty much covered it.
Is the blanket big enough?
The blanket's big enough.
Okay.
I would say that my final thought would be the fact that my argument of Robert Frost being a transcendentalist is the fact that you couldn't classify him as anything but his own. He's a transcendentalist by the fact that you can't classify him as a transcendentalist. He's a modernist by the fact that you can't classify him as such, because they're very much about individuality, and I feel that Frost doesn't really fit in any class aside from his own, because he's such a big phenomenon that goes over so much in his writing.
Okay, fair enough. I think that's a fair category.
That's how I see it, and I think that's what makes him brilliant. If you're interested in reading Frost's poetry, here's his complete collection, the complete collection of Robert Frost's poetry. I definitely encourage you to check it out.
Great stuff in there. Great stuff.
Be sure to join us next time for another episode of Literary Gladiators, and for now, keep reading.
And stay frosty.